I'm really into getting stuff without paying for it. Like, there are a ton of games out there that simply don't require money, especially if you're okay with using a crowbar. But there are free games out there too, even though most free-to-play games are a slot machine that spits out anime women. The coolest part is they cost real money. The games I'm going to show you today aren't like that. They don't have ads or loot boxes, and some even run in browser. All of them are different and well designed, so really, do check one out if you think it looks cool. There's something for everyone. Like, this one is almost more of an art piece than a game, and it's super cool. In Fluto, you play as this little guy with a big snoot. He's got a bell hanging out goth style, with a septum piercing and everything. In this dark forest, you give off a small ring of light that grows and shrinks with the ringing of your bell. There's a hush in the air, broken only by your steps and jingling calls. But then, an answer. It's an Oompet. These little guys will follow your lead and do what you ask. They'll walk around, gather resources, or even help you grow more Oompets. And as they start to wake, the silence becomes sprinkled with sound. Each little guy adds their own notes to the soundscape as they wake up and work. Your lonely walk through the woods quickly becomes filled with company. As you gather more resources and Oompets, their scattered notes will start to form into a full melody. There are plenty of games where the song that's playing changes based on what you do, but I've never played anything like this before. The loop of gathering Oompets to collect resources, to build, to gather more Oompets is very simple, but the way the song changes as your village grows is such a unique feeling of discovery. It's a feeling I haven't gotten from a game before, and I think that's because I don't hear anyone talk about games like this. Most of the time, everyone's talking about the latest big release. And more power to you if you enjoy those, but like, how many times are we gonna remake The Last of Us? This one's not even a game. And look, I know Fortnite and Overwatch made more money than the GDP of Albania, but please, I don't need more shooters with a battle pass. If we don't stop them, they're gonna lock Wii Sports Matt behind landing 5 headshots. When every studio is doing the same trendy thing, to me it feels stale. But games can be so much more. Like, pretty much any genre I can think of is on itch.io. A lot of peeps I know on Discord have been getting into model kits and Gundam lately, so I poked around for a game with big robots, and Gearbits is exactly that. I haven't played almost any mecha games, but Gearbits definitely seems like it's pretty standard for the genre. Your mech can fly, hover, and switch between 3 different weapons. The core experience is balancing the booster temperature while reloading to keep the bugs at bay. The game will switch up terrain, enemy density, and enemy type pretty often, which means I had to quickly learn to switch between weapons to keep popping pupa. Weapon switching, reloading, and using hover and flight modes adds up to a ton of inputs on the controller at once. There are moments where I'd be using both sticks, both triggers, and flexing to hit a face button. This is awesome, even if my hands became like pretzel. There are plenty of ways to make the player feel big and powerful, but that's not the only thing a mecha game is trying to do. Canonically, you're not the big powerful killing machine, you're the pilot. It's kind of like learning to drive. There's 10,000 switches and dials and control sticks, and it's your job to get so integrated into those systems that the big robot feels like an extension of your body. Getting rooted into the robot, customizing it, getting the booster limit into my muscle memory, that changed my relationship with the mech. All of the clunky controls shifted to feeling natural, and suddenly I was gliding then flying while switching to a missile while already aiming it at where my target was going to be by the time it landed. It really felt like I was piloting the big robot, and that it was my big robot, and that I was its little pilot, and our wedding is this fall. It's not like there are no other mecha games out there. There's a new Armored Core and Megaton Musashi out, but what's awesome is that there's also Gearbits, completely independent of the big studio system. Even just searching mecha on itch, there's a ton of games about giant robots, all with different mechanics and art styles. The variety and number of different experiences is massive. So many fresh takes on ideas that normally only get played with by a small group of companies. Where else are you gonna find a strategic dice game starring almost legally distinct late-night host Conan Throw Bryan? That's real! And yes, I think you should play the Conan Blackjack game. Blackjack really is the easiest way to describe how it works, but there are a couple added mechanics that elevate it it to being kind of addicting. The goal is to roll dice that add up to as close to 13 as possible without going over. Each turn, you play a card that decides how many dice you roll and some additional effects. The audience then rolls, and you can choose to end it there or keep trying to increase your score. You have to score higher than the audience to win, and the difference in points gets added to your Nielsen score. The higher the score, the better the guest you'll get at the end of 3 rounds. It's all dice rolls, so there's a ton of luck involved, but each card is different enough that choosing between them is a fun exercise in probability. The dice actually rolling adds to the anticipation every time. It perfectly rides the edge between gambling and skill. It has a feeling of control while still using chance to give a huge high, which is the reason I should never step inside a real casino. All of the mechanics fit together to create an addiction machine, but that's not why I love it. Some of it is my gambling problem blossoming, but the real secret sauce is Conan himself. The late night talk show theming, the noisy pixel art, the intro writing alone, the flavor of this game, the style. That's where it really comes together. Things like the cards you play all being categories of jokes that Conan is known for. The game's stitching together a stand-up routine from the cards that you play. The intro and style and general concept of a Conan blackjack game are all the sort of absurdist joke that Conan would do. The style and systems of the game feel like natural consequences of each other. Nothing feels forced because it's all coming from the same theme of absurdism. Take out Conan and the game would fall flat. Everyone I've shown it to played it because the concept was really stupid, in a complimentary way. This wouldn't hit the same if it played the parody safe and probably more legal. The game mechanics are great on their own, but the funny Ginger Man style is the substance. That is the sort of game that can only be made and released in places like itch, and I'm so grateful that there's space for it. Throw Brian isn't alone. There are so many games that get to exist only because of platforms that don't gate publishing behind hundreds of dollars. So many small experiences that are perfect for a free hour or two, like B9F. One of the tightest design games I've ever played. I'm talking Pac-Man Galaga levels of simple but powerful gameplay. Mechanics that just make sense, like run from ghost, shoot alien, eat a key. I love arcade games. There's a local arcade with a ton of machines from the 80s and 90s that I love going to. The harsh limitations of memory and controllers led to some incredibly smart and creative design choices. There's no room for stuff that doesn't add to the game. So when an arcade game is designed well, it becomes its own little world to master. That harsh limitation leading to creativity is what makes arcade games so powerful, and that spirit still exists today. B9F is designed for the Pico 8 console, and if you've never heard of it, that's because it doesn't exist. Pico 8 isn't a real physical game console, it's more like a program that pretends to be an old video game console. It's an emulator for a system that never existed. The limitations of sprite sizes, color palettes, and small memory are all here. Things that make a console unique are present, but it was never put together and sold in a box. Instead, people just make games for it and release them online for fun. I tell you all this because Pico 8 is a really limited console to develop for. This is the size of the display, and by using some software magic that I won't pretend to understand, this image is a video game. It has all the code for B9F hidden in the pixels. Every Pico 8 game is like this. The whole game fits into a PNG file that also has a screenshot of the game. That is not a lot of space. It's a similar amount of limitation to old arcade cabinets, and because of that, you get some really simple but elegant games. B9F is one of those. Kill all the blobs on screen, and then go to the next level in the elevator, cause it's like the level in the game, but also the level in the building. It's clever. You can walk, roll, and swing, and that's it. The entire rest of the game is determined by where the enemies are and how they act. Each enemy type moves and attacks differently. Taking on just one is pretty easy, but when multiple different enemies are attacking, their patterns make a sort of rhythm. The time when one is vulnerable might be covered by another attacking, so you'll have to move strategically to get between them. It's almost musical. I developed this sense of when the time to strike was and when I needed to back off. The stabby salsa, the amount of variety that comes from just placing different enemies in different groups is impressive. Each one feels so distinct, and when they combine, my carefully planned strategy quickly crumbles into panicked slashing and running. Like any good arcade game, there's a point where I just fully fell apart. And B9F isn't just a good arcade game, it's a great one. It's not the sort of thing that could be sold in Walmart behind a glass case because of its short length, but not every game needs to be a $70, 100-hour experience. And when little games like this get made, not only do they often end up being excellently designed, but they're also usually free. Because B9F didn't take $400 million to make, it can just kind of be dropped on itch for people to enjoy. It is an undeniably good thing to directly support artists whose work you enjoy. I'm not trying to say everyone who makes an indie game should release it for free, but for those who are willing and able to release free stuff, accessible artwork like this does so much for people and culture. And cultural tastes have changed. Games and genres that used to be mainstream have become less and less accessible. There are so many genres that have almost gone extinct in the AAA space, as studios have shifted to making fewer, more expensive, and more mass-marketable projects. But as big studios have been taking larger and larger gambles, a gap has been left in the types of games that they used to make. Like, Capcom has pretty much abandoned Mega Man in favor of their bigger multiplayer titles and cinematic action games. As someone who grew up playing Mega Man 1 and 2, and is pretty much into every spin-off, I have been hungry. Starving. I played Mighty Number 9. It's actually pretty good, but still, it's a highly controversial Kickstarter game from 2016. Really the best this entire genre has to offer are explosions that look like cafeteria pizza, the only prey for my ravenous carnal hunger. No, I'm not the only person who wants to play a jump and shoot game, and some of those people are smart and cool and made Prototype N. It's easy to draw comparisons between it and the classics of 2D platforming. You shoot lemons, you pick levels from a cartoony overworld. It's very clearly drawing from Mega Man 3 and Super Mario World. A lot of elements here feel familiar, but that's a good thing. Having parts that feel like other games creates a link between those classics and Prototype N. These aren't just surface-level references. The game is using what I recognize to show what kind of game it is. When I boot into a level and see a little splash screen followed by an absolutely bumping soundtrack over a 16-ish-bit art style, I know that Prototype N plays fast and has multiple pathways in its levels, because it did the Sonic thing right at the start. When I see a Mario-style overworld, I immediately get that I can take my power-ups between levels, and that I'm gonna get to choose which levels to play. These aren't just stylistic references, they're tropes. Tropes are what let the player know how the game works before they've even played it. When I boot up a game for the first time, any button on the controller could do anything. But the moment I see a cute character facing right on a ground plane with floating platforms and little creatures walking around, I'm having a Ratatouille moment. And suddenly I know that I need to walk right, jump over pits, and kill these things. Instantly, I know all the basics of the game and can go straight to what makes it special and interesting. And there is a ton that's special about Prototype N. It combines ideas from the classics into something fresh by figuring out what happens when those ideas play together. Is it a Super Mario with Mega Man shooting and Sonic level design? Is it a Mega Man with linear structure and an emphasis on characters and story? No, it's Prototype N, and it's one of the coolest platformers I've played. One of its defining features are the different weapons available in each level. Each weapon follows a different path when it fires, and because of that, each one is better or worse at killing different enemies. To play in the best way possible, I was consistently switching between them, which changed how I was positioning my jumps. This is the secret sauce to jump and shoot games, a constant ebb and flow between weapons that, when done right, feels like I'm an overpowered robot warrior. In Mega Man, those different weapons are locked behind the bosses, and because the player can choose any order to play the levels, each one has to assume that the player doesn't have anything other than the default blaster. That means that the only levels in Mega Man that can be designed with all the weapons in mind are at the very end. It leads to this weird difficulty curve where the first 8 levels feel really similar, and then the final 2 levels suddenly expect the player to have mastered everything. Prototype N dodges this problem completely by giving the levels a set order, and by making the weapons power-ups in the level. You don't have to wait until the end of the game to play levels that are designed around weapon switching. Prototype N just gives you the weapons and asks you to rip and tear robots like they're a plate of fried chicken. That special spice blend of mechanics and design doesn't end at the shooty bits. Look at her! I'm gonna stop trying to make points with logic for a moment and just say that I need a 12-wheeler's worth of Nadine fan art to flood the internet immediately. The decision to give her a big floppy hat and a Ghibli protagonist sundress in the very first scene is nothing short of transcendent. All of the sprites in this game are really cute, but Nadine especially deserves to achieve the status of darling mascot. It's just so lovely to play around in a new world with new characters. I love the classic franchises, but how cool is it that anyone can bring their own world to life and just instantly share it with people everywhere? Thousands of new game designers publishing their work means that you get wonderful new takes on older underserved genres, and at the same time find new combinations that no one's put together before. There's so many new experiences available for free that I probably wouldn't have tried otherwise. Like, I'm not really into block puzzle games, but I went ahead and tried Critter Switcher anyway, and I'm so glad I did. The thing about block puzzles is they feel like the default when a game wants to add something to a dungeon that isn't a battle. Pokemon does it, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's Stardust Accelerator does it, and I'm sure other games do it too, but I don't feel like researching it. The point is, in the games I've played, block puzzles usually end up as a side activity that don't do anything new or interesting with the idea, so I've developed a distaste for them. But Critter Switcher is all about the blocks and tiles, and it goes cool places with it. And because it's a tiny game, it doesn't need to get bloated with extra features and padding for the sake of playtime. It can be about just one thing. So what makes its take on block puzzles interesting? Well, it builds itself around killing moving enemies rather than making a path through a blocked room. This is probably called something different than a block puzzle game, but it uses like 90% of the same mechanics and systems, and also, I don't have a deep knowledge about puzzle game subgenres, so we're just gonna have to go with the words I know. Every time you move a tile, all the enemies on screen will also take a turn. In the short term, the goal is to bump into enemies while avoiding being bumped into. If an enemy tries to enter the tile you're standing on, you lose a heart. Luckily, animals have 3 hearts, just like in real life. In the long term, the goal is to explore the randomly shuffled around maze to find all the animals and escape. Each animal has a unique trait that changes how it plays. You might be able to fly over walls or use tunnel spaces to teleport. As they're found, the animal you play as will be randomly changed every 3 moves. This gives the game a natural difficulty curve. As the further you get, the more little details you have to consider before making a move. Adding that randomness to a shuffled maze layout, Critter Switcher becomes a block puzzle roguelike. Each run is automatically timed, so it has this added tension of trying to balance clearing rooms with moving quickly through the maze. It's the first game I've seen to make this kind of puzzle replayable. I don't know if these rooms are randomly generated or just randomly randomly shuffled from a set list, but either way, there's still plenty to dig into skill-wise. It's a combination of elements that is super fresh, and my favorite part about it is just how snappy it is. The short length makes it perfect for repeat attempts, and each animal gets introduced quick enough that it feels dynamic for the whole run. If Critter Switcher took any longer to beat, if its mazes were massive or had multiple levels with progression between them, it would lose the simplicity that makes it so great. I don't need Critter Switcher Season 4 featuring EB from Hop. Having a slim form factor is what got me to try a game like this in the first place, and I feel all the more inspired to check out new things. Playing games with a small scope means I can finish them faster, which means I get to play way more games, and a greater variety too. That sort of exploration and discovery is one of my favorite parts about playing games. Finding new games by just sort of browsing shows me stuff I've never even thought of playing. Like for this one, I just saw the title Cats and Dice, and I was like, yeah, I like both those things. What's really exciting about it is how it builds on Balatro. You probably know what Balatro is, but if you don't, Balatro is a roguelike where you cheat at poker big time in order to pass levels and buy more cards to keep up with increasing score requirements. One of the biggest indie games this year, definitely gonna win some awards, and was single-handedly responsible for making me good at gambling. The effect Balatro has had on the indie game scene is huge. It popularized a new subgenre of games that center around fixing your odds at winning games of chance. I don't think there's been a name for these yet, but I've been calling them roguecinos. Cats and Dice is a recent addition to the genre, and it keeps what makes games like Balatro work, while also making some really exciting changes. All of the bones of a working roguecino are there. You have a set of pieces that are worth different point values depending on how unlikely it is that they can be played together. Each round, you play hands until you have enough points to beat the requirement. You get money, which can be spent in the shop to add modifiers to your pieces and how they're scored. But by changing out cards for dice, a ton of other things need to be adjusted as well. Instead of having 52 cards to modify, there are only 6 dice, with 36 faces total. To make things more interesting, the cats and dice are tied together. Each cat modifies something about how the dice are played or scored, but they also come with their own die. Every time a cat gets added or removed, the pool of available dice faces also changes, shifting the probabilities around. So while Cats and Dice gives fewer chances to the player to make changes to their deck, each of those decisions has much more impact. It feels really weighty to change out one cat for another, and I found myself sitting in the shop thinking it over for minutes, feeling like I was some sort of card-counting genius. The other major change is the dice themselves. In a card game, once a card is drawn and discarded, it's not going to show up again. A large part of card-based games is weeding out cards that have less powerful effects to guarantee the cards you need end up in your hand. You can't get rid of a bad face on a die though. Every reroll, there's a chance that a low number could show up, giving each roll a big feeling of anticipation. A gambler's high, if you will, which I'm constantly on because I can't lose. There are mechanics to shift those odds around, of course. A die might only have one number on all its faces, or keep whatever number it was played as when it's rolled again. But the deck building aspect of Cats and Dice is much less about guaranteeing high scores by burning cards, and more about playing the odds as far as you're willing to push your luck. It's a fundamentally different experience, and it all comes from just changing one small thing and playing out the consequences. Seeing how that change affects the whole game was not only a fun gameplay experience, but I also learned a lot about what makes this genre so addicting. That's not an experience exclusive to Cats and Dice. Pretty much any game I find online has something unique to teach me. Being able to find games from all over the world is so cool. Shouts out my patrons, and if you want to hear more about weird games, click the card to see some forgotten gems on the 3DS. Thanks for hanging out!